Once upon a time, in the far north, where snow-covered valleys met wide open seas, there lived the Moomins in their quiet home, surrounded by forests and rivers. But one winter was not like the others, because a traveler from another world was about to appear and test their courage and kindness in a way they had never expected. Moomin Troll was the first to notice something unusual when he walked near the frozen river early in the morning and saw tracks that did not belong to any animal he knew. These were heavy boot prints, deep in the snow, and they led toward the cliffs by the shore, where the ice met the sea. Snufkin, who had just returned from his travels, looked at the tracks and said they must belong to a man, and not just any man, but a warrior from the old lands. The Moomins felt uneasy, because they had heard stories of men in iron, with ships that cut through the sea like knives, and voices that shook the air like thunder. Snork Maiden asked if it was dangerous, but Moomin Troll said they would find out together. When they reached the cliffs, they saw a figure standing tall against the wind, a man with a heavy beard, a fur cloak, and a broad axe strapped across his back. He was a Viking, named Thorvald, who had sailed with his crew across the sea, but a storm had broken his ship and left him stranded on these unfamiliar shores. Thorvald saw the small creatures approaching, and at first thought they were spirits or illusions born of hunger, but as they came closer, he realized they were real and alive. He asked, in a booming voice, who they were and why they dared to walk near him. Moomin Troll answered with calm, saying they were the Moomins, and that they wished to know if he needed help. The Viking laughed at the idea that small, round beings, with soft voices, could help a man like him, but there was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, because he had never seen creatures like these before. Snufkin spoke next and said that help could come in many forms, not only with weapons, but with food, warmth, and songs. Thorvald was silent for a while, and then admitted that he was cold and hungry, since the storm had taken his supplies. Hearing this, the Moomins decided to bring him back to their valley, where they could share a meal and give him shelter. As they walked, Thorvald looked around at the snow-covered forests and the little houses of the valley, and felt a strange softness in his heart, though he did not show it. At the Moomin house, Moomin Mama prepared a great stew and laid out bread and warm drinks, while Snork Maiden set the table. Thorvald sat uncomfortably at first, because he was used to eating among warriors, not gentle hosts, but when he tasted the food, he could not help but close his eyes in relief. For the first time in weeks, he felt safe. Still, he carried the pride of a Viking, and he asked them why they had brought him kindness when they knew nothing about him. Moomin Troll said that, in their valley, they welcomed everyone, because friendship was stronger than fear. Thorvald was puzzled by this, because he had been taught that strength came from conquest, and that victory was measured in the lands and treasures one could claim. Snufkin told him that there was another kind of strength in living peacefully and in protecting what you love. The Viking did not argue, but deep inside he wondered which way was greater. That night, Thorvald stayed in the guest room of the Moomins, and though he tried to rest, his mind was full of questions. He dreamed of his crew lost at sea, of battles fought in distant lands, and of laughter that echoed from the Moomin house. He woke before dawn and stepped outside into the snow, where the valley was quiet and still. There, he saw Moomin Troll already awake, watching the sunrise. Moomin Troll asked him if he was thinking about home, and Thorvald nodded. He said his home was across the sea, with strong walls and a hall filled with warriors, but now he felt as if he was standing between two worlds, one of war and one of peace. Moomin Troll simply smiled and said that sometimes the heart must choose, not the axe. These words stayed with Thorvald, though he said nothing more. The next day, the valley was full of activity, because the snow was beginning to melt, and the river cracked open with rushing water, while the Moomins prepared for the spring festival. Thorvald watched with interest as everyone worked together, without orders or shouting. Little My ran around tying ribbons on the trees, while Snufkin tuned his harmonica, and Moomin Mama stirred another pot of stew that filled the air with warmth. Thorvald remembered how, in his own village, such work was done under command, with loud voices and strict rules, but here, each creature seemed to move with joy, as if work was play. He asked Snorkmaiden why they were decorating the trees, and she explained that it was to celebrate the return of light and to remind themselves that even after long winters, happiness comes back. Thorvald thought about this, because in his homeland, they celebrated victories and gods, but not the simple return of light. As the evening came, the festival began with songs and dancing around the fire. Thorvald sat at the edge at first, his axe resting by his side, and his eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting a battle. But soon, the music of Snufkin's harmonica filled the night with gentle notes that wrapped around the fire like smoke. Moomin Troll pulled Thorvald by the hand and said he should join the dance. At first, Thorvald refused, but then he found himself stepping slowly in rhythm, until his heavy boots matched the lighter steps of the Moomins. The valley rang with laughter, and Thorvald felt something he had never felt among warriors, a sense of belonging without fear. Later that night, he told Moomin Mama that the kindness of the valley was stronger than any shield he had carried. She nodded and said that kindness is the only shield that never breaks. Thorvald thought about his old life of raids across the seas and wondered if those victories meant anything compared to the peace he felt now. Yet, he also knew that his nature as a Viking was not gone. He still dreamed of sails against the horizon and the sound of iron clashing. The question of who would win between a Viking and the Moomins grew in his mind, not as a fight with weapons, but as a fight between ways of living. Was strength in the axe or in the heart? Days passed, and Thorvald grew closer to the Moomins, but whispers spread among the creatures of the forest that a Viking might bring danger. Some feared he would call more ships when the ice melted. Thorvald heard these whispers, and it hurt him, though he did not show it. He decided to prove his worth by protecting the valley when a pack of wolves came down from the hills one night, hungry from the hard winter. Thorvald took up his axe and stood between the wolves and the Moomin house. The wolves snarled, but before he could strike, Moomin Troll stepped beside him and said they should not fight with anger. Together, they banged pots and lit torches, driving the wolves away without killing. Thorvald was amazed that such a simple act had saved them all and that no blood had been spilled. He lowered his axe, and for the first time, he felt proud without having to swing it. In the morning, he asked Moomin Troll if this meant the Moomins had won, and Moomin Troll replied that there was no winning or losing when friends worked together. Thorvald laughed quietly and said perhaps that was the real victory after all. The days in the valley continued to teach Thorvald new lessons. He learned to fish without nets, to cook bread with Moomin Mama, and to sit by the fire, listening to stories instead of boasting about battles. The more he stayed, the more he wondered if he could ever return to his old life. He began to see that the contest between a Viking and a Moomin was not about axes and shields, but about what path could bring the greater strength, the strength of fear or the strength of joy. He still carried his axe, but each day it grew lighter in his hand, as if it was no longer a weapon, but only a memory of what he once was.